Okay, hello everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are joining in from. Thank you so much for being a part of what we're doing again today. As always, my name is Musola, and it's always a joy to bring you um, great content regarding language, heritage, preservation, and all that. And today, as you've heard me always say during my live sessions, I'm bringing in chess. I'm bringing in chess. Today, I have brought in Cheselin. So I won't be doing this alone today, and I'm very glad. I mentioned during the last two streams that I've had a few conversations with Cheslin, and her passion in this direction is very contagious. The energy, I think it can literally power the entire earth. I mean, if that's not, I know that's not an exaggeration. All right. So yeah, let's quickly, just hear from Cheslin, and then I'll do a quick introduction, and then we'll join we'll start out for today's session. So Ches, just give us a quick background of yourself
Oh,
and greet
sure.
the people.
Yes, well, thanks for having me, Busola, and the whole Tayari Life team. So a little bit about me and where I come from. So I am born and raised here in Canada on unceded Indigenous lands. My parents are Haitian political refugees, migrated through Dominican Republic, came here as well. And so I was raised in a very traditional, conservative Haitian household. I was exposed to so many languages and cultures, but I didn't end up speaking fluently as a child for many different reasons that I'm sure a lot of people can relate. And so, fast forward to when I became an adult, I just thought it was weird. You go to school, speak all those languages, none of them have to do with your heritage. And so, I started the journey of teaching myself the language. Now, fast forward to today, I speak it fluently. I teach others, including elders and my parents as well. And I've dedicated my life to making sure that the next generations can walk into a different kind of childhood experience than a lot of us have had. So, how do we make being raised bilingually as proud, African, Afro descendant, wherever we are? And how can we make geography a non issue? It shouldn't be harder because you're born or raised in a diaspora versus been born back home or in the continent. And there's so many
Mhm.
misconceptions. And so I'm excited as well that we get to unpack a lot of it. There's so many opportunities and misconceptions. So that's kind of what brings me to the table today. Yeah.
Awesome, awesome. Thank you so much again for taking time to do this with us. So, I think we can just go straight to. So, you started off by saying, your parents are, also moved down to Canada and all that. So, so tell me and tell us, how did it
Mm.
feel like growing up in that kind of an environment where, well, I think I could categorize you as a third culture kid, right? Because you did not have that
Yes.
privilege to
Yes.
grow up with parents, original. No. So tell me, let us know how was that growing up, your formative years, teenage years, and then adolescence?
Mm.
How was that?
It was very interesting. And I'm sure, and that's what I love with being Black and the Pan African experience, because I'm sure a lot of people can, see themselves in that story. It was interesting because when my parents, they would always speak like Haitian Creole around me. But at some point, very early on, they thought I was going to get confused. And because as first generation immigrants, they had dealt with a lot of racism. So because of their accent,
Mm,
their name, we could tell right away, you're not like we would see here, Ginette Tremblay. You don't have like a typical white French Canadian name and everything. And so they thought that they were making things easier for me to have me assimilate through language and accent reduction.
mm,
But what they were doing is cutting me off from my heritage because with the access to information we have now with language acquisition in children, the child is not confused
mm,
and they're in their prime
mm,
formative year to absorb that information a lot more, right? So there was a paradox because you're proud of being Haitian, of being Black and everything, but at the same time, you are strategically divorcing your child from a connection to their heritage because you want to survive.
mm,
So you see a lot of the generational tension and struggle and trauma in all of it. And as well, growing up, particularly my mom was very traumatized from, the reasons why they had to flee the country, and she never wanted me to go back as a child when it was safe and possible for me to do so a lot more than now. So that was another layer, because when you live particularly abroad, you don't have immediate immersive exposure to the language. It means that your gateway or direct access point to the motherland is your parents and your family. Now you have a
yeah.
generation of parents that are traumatized, don't have the tools to deal with the trauma of why they had to flee in the first place. And so passing
Mm,
on the culture to the child can be a trigger for that kind of parent in the first place. So that's also part of the
you're right.
layered and the complexity,
Mm,
right? And also, they
mm,
came from a generation where, in a culture where you don't question your elders because I said so. So, me asking questions about the culture was disrespectful based on the cultural norms that we
wow.
had, you know? And so, it's all those things that now I can see and I can unpack. And so, it speaks to the complexity of raising proud, immigrant children that are African or of, African descent, when there's all that generational trauma that our parents are not equipped or educated to face by themselves. And the other thing too
Mm,
was, I was almost like a permanent tourist, but never allowed to be a permanent resident in the Haitian culture here, because whenever I would have an opinion or something that challenged their norms, then I'm rejected, because anyway, you're the white one, you're the American one, so you don't get to have an opinion about politics, right?
oh, wow.
So there was also that dynamic. And when, as a child, I would pick up on the language and I'm trying to say a few words, automatically the family laughs. They're laughing you out of the room. Ah, look at the little white one, trying to say something. And so those were a lot of the
Mm,
firsthand experiences that I had. So you have people who are proud, but because of, again, like I said, trauma, misinformation
mm,
about multilingualism, because of internalized racism, because of so many
mhm,
things, they end up pushing away the child from the culture that they are so proud of, but ill equipped to pass
mm,
on. So those were a lot of the tension and dynamics. And I've seen so many people, second generations, third culture kids, who then decided to reject the culture because of the family
yeah,
trauma. Because for us,
yeah,
the
yeah.
minute you take a
Mm,
step back from your parents, and your parents are your primal conduit to culture, you effectively
yeah.
isolated yourself away from your ability to know more about your history and ancestry firsthand, particularly with language. Because even if you learn the
Mm,
language, who you're going to speak to if you don't talk to your mom or your dad, or if you have a
exactly.
very
You're correct.
triggering, you know, exactly,
Mm,
or unwholesome relationship. So I've seen so much of that growing up. And me, I'm a very rebellious, independent person. I was like, just because I was like, I don't accept this. I don't accept that either I get abused to have proximity to my roots, or either the path to healing
mm,
means that now I'm ostracized from my community. That makes no sense. And as
mm,
anything in life, you don't have to fit into a binary. But I saw a lot of those
yeah.
extremes. I've seen people that were fluent, but then the same kind of biases, prejudices, cultural limitations that their parents had, they had. And then I saw the other extreme of the culturally woke, the second generation. They are completely removed from that direct access to language and culture in that way, because of generational trauma with the elders and their parents, who in the diaspora are not just parents, they are actually knowledge keepers and they're language educators, right? And so I've seen those extremes. And again, I was like, it doesn't have to be either or. There has to be something
Mm,
better in the middle. And that's where my passion for this work came up, and I started creating the tools that I needed as a child. Now I'm able to do this for other
Mm.
people. And it's interesting because it's also changed my relationship to my own parents, where now a lot of the time I become the parent that they could have been for me as a child. And so it's a very interesting dynamic of healing across generation through language and culture. Yeah.
Awesome. So I wanted to, because in all honesty, I think to a large extent, you're being able to really recognize where the gaps showed up, right? I think
Mm-hmm.
that was how you were
Mm-hmm.
able to really figure exactly how you're going to approach this and then not lose family. I mean, I really
Yes.
like the fact that you said eventually it's somewhat there's now a better proximity between yourself and your parents. But at what point did you
Mm.
begin to really did it begin to make sense to you as to why they were acting that way and
Mm.
how it was resulting in your proximity from the culture and the language at what point? Because
Mm.
I want to believe, I mean, someone may come in contact with this later on, just see they see they see can't really map the
Mm.
entire thing together. Of course, it can be the same context. It could be different for whatever. But
Yeah.
I mean, there could just be something as a common denominator as to, okay, this is how you begin to know that this is the reason they're actually asking you not to. You know,
Mm. I see.
but how for you?
Mm. No, that's a very good question, because what helped me put things together was, for example, my parents were always extremely proud. To this day, they don't have a Canadian citizenship. Okay. Their plan was always to go
Oh,
back. So that was very clear. And so for me, I was
wow.
raised in a very politically conscious family. Every conversation, politics. And it was never just Haitian politics. They know about Africa. They are always like very invested in the condition of people of color across the globe. And so it was fascinating because
Mm,
I could see that in this area, my parents are very generous and aware and open with me. It was more so when it came to the minute that language becomes part of how we bond and communicate, that's where I started seeing gaps and discrepancies, right? Because in everything else,
mm,
they go above and beyond to raise me to be a proud, self supporting, empowered Black woman in white America. But the minute that that thing happened, where now we're switching things up to talk to me in Creole, or now we're having the same experience as a family, but it's culturally translated in Creole, I started to notice that how come they're behaving different? How come they parent me different in French than in Creole?
mm,
Or how come they parent me different when I am in a position to respond in our native language? And so it helped me see the
mm,
psychology of my parents and to understand that they are conditions to how they parent me, that have nothing to do with their love for me, but have to do with them trying to figure out how to give me tools to be strong without being discriminated in a white dominant country. And so for me, seeing my
mm,
parents, noticing how their parenting styles was different based on cultural context, who is in the room, what's going on, I picked upon that very quickly. Also, because I was a third culture kid, so I'm dealing with this conservative cultural, Afrocentric education at home. But I'm also very much a minority
mm,
in every other room that I am, because I am living in a very white dominant neighborhood and so on and so forth. So I always had this
mm,
experience of knowing what it's like to be treated as an outsider in a culture that I was also a part of. So it's almost like I had the reverse experience with white people, and I had a very similar but different experience with my own community. So my community treats me as a white person when I challenge them, and the white community treats me as a Black person just because I breathe. And so when you do that, they talk a lot about the double consciousness, and it taught me a lot of different things, right? And in the case of my family, it's internalized racism, it's survivorship, it's generational trauma. And in the case of, white people around me and the system in general, Well, it's because again, those are the primal colonizers. I'm living in colonizer land. And so it was this
mm,
dichotomy that gave me cues and clues and context to be able to appreciate the parenting that my parents thought they had to give me to survive, which was very different from the parenting that I needed to grow to be a strong, proud, Afro descendant child. And so those were
mm.
things that I could relate to. Yeah.
Awesome, awesome. I mean, there's a whole lot of, I mean, emotional attachment to yours. In all honesty, I think was really more beyond the language. But hey, I mean, it's all right. So you initially talked about how this has then become your passion. So let's
Mm,
switch a bit into that.
mhm.
Let's talk about the work you've been doing since then. What's been the reception? What age bracket have you been working with? How has it been? What challenges have you faced, and all that? So let's talk about that.
Oh, yes. Oh my goodness. This work is so rich because, to segue into your question by also finishing the thought from the last one, when you're constantly treated as an outsider, it gives you a very unique perspective. And it also made me question things a lot more than people who are born in a country or in a culture where there's a lot of conformity. We don't question how culture needs to operate because we live in a very homogeneous environment. But because I was exposed to
Mhm,
so many different cultures that had conflicting messaging about each other and about themselves, I had no choice but to question, why do we do this? Why do we speak like this? Why
mhm,
do we judge XYZ and so on and so forth, right? And so it was very interesting
mhm,
because from a young age, it put me in a position to question a lot of the cultural traditions that we had as a Haitian people. And for me, it was not
mhm,
good enough that, are we doing this because it's good, or are we doing this because it's expected? And I started questioning a
mhm,
lot of cultural practices. And that did not always go well with my parents or family. It was seen as rude, and who are you to do this and this and that? You have to do it because I told you. I didn't ask those questions to my mom and things like that, right? And so why did that plant the seed for my work? Is that I started asking questions, and then I realized that I have the right instinct, but I have the wrong teacher. And so I started going online, and
mhm,
I went and I learned about the history that we are never taught. The Haitian history that a lot of my peers don't know, because again, they go by the programming. Mommy said so, the
yeah,
school said so. We don't
yeah,
question the system in that
yeah,
same way. And it exposed me to
yeah.
a lot of ancestral traditional practices that we have that predates colonization, that over time were removed
Mm,
from the curriculum and from what has become acceptable social norms. And it helped me understand that African culture, Afro descendant culture, Haitian culture is so much bigger than my family's perception, understanding, or interpretation of it. And that helped me
mm,
realize it's so much richer than what we know. And it made me fascinated about that. Um, and that became a bit like the foundation of my work, especially because now I'm in a point in my life where I'm preparing to become a parent myself. And now I'm kind of I'm in the position that my parents were when they tried to parent me to the best of their abilities. But now I have access to so much more information, and I've evolved my thinking
mm,
about what language and culture is. And all of that, it really informs my work a lot. But to go back to your point, because of this very interesting background, the way that I look at
mhm.
tradition, culture, language is so different. And I'm in almost in
Okay.
a position where I do cultural rehab. So sometimes, because you're born in the country, because you have a certain age, a certain status, people feel like they're more entitled to be seen as legitimate, or they think they know.
Mm,
And so often the work that I do is I reintroduce back to them the real history and the real language and the real culture that we were all never taught at school, in back home in our
Mm.
country. So you can understand that there's a lot of backlash from certain people, and even for the people who embrace those different ideas, it's hard for them to fully wrap their head around it, because it goes again centuries of conditioning that they've had with their parents, with their family, with their country, with school, with the media, and everything, right? So I find that in many ways, the more you learn the truth about your history, your roots, and where you come from, a lot of the time you have to do a lot of relearning and unlearning, and you have
Yeah.
to do almost
Yeah.
like an ideological rehab of yourself and of your identity, right?
Yes.
So
Yeah.
for example, to make it clearer, we have a history of beating up children and they call it discipline. Historically, those were a lot of practices that came to us through slavery. So when you look at a lot of pre-colonial African indigenous practices, it was not customary to beat up our children. But through slavery,
Mm.
it was something that was normalized, because the parenting blueprint for a lot of our people comes from, is inspired after like the enslaver to enslaved relationship, right? And so, but
Okay.
because it's been centuries of doing that, for a lot of people, it's cultural, but it's not cultural, it's colonial.
Mm.
Or it's not cultural, it's political, right? And so that's something that I'm
Mm.
unpacking for a lot of people. So if you don't beat up your children, what do you do? But that for a lot of people, it's so
Mm.
ingrained. They resist it and they resent it and they're conflicted. What do I
Yeah.
do?
Mm.
Right? Or another thing for me is with my work with my native language, which is Creole. I actually discovered that, it's an Afro-Indigenous language. It's not a Creole language. And so for a lot of people, again, that's shocking and they don't understand where this is coming from. So then I show them the history, the African Indigenous history that we were not
Mhm.
allowed to learn, that was forbidden, that was out loud. And I also
Mm.
reintroduced them to their language, because, like a lot of other languages, we had a lot of pressure to use French. And so over time, what
Oh.
happened was that a lot of people kept using French words instead of using Afro Indigenous words and grammar that we already had. And so over time, you end up
Oh.
with a very Frenchified Creole, but it's not the only way to speak the language, and it's not the most authentically indigenous way to speak. So then I'm here teaching
Mhm.
people about, instead of saying that word, you can say that word.
It's
I'm
a
teaching
sword.
people how
Mm.
to decolonize how they speak, so that they can access the true Afro indigenous foundation of our language. So this is an example of what that looks like for me right now, and that comes with its fair share of backlash, because a lot of people, for
Mm.
us, they build their identity around struggle. But if you remove struggle and if you remove trauma or oppression, a lot of people struggle at times to understand what is blackness without the white man, what is blackness without
Mm.
oppression, you know. And again, for a lot of those people, they were told that African languages are not as dominant or valid as, colonial languages. That's why you don't see our languages used in science or in the academy to the same
Yeah.
extent. And so they
Yeah.
internalize this notion that we are linguistically inferior, or we are only dialects, that those are not professional languages. And so those are all things that I'm here to unpack, and I need to give them concrete examples and tools, and I need to model the way in how I operate as well. So that's why for me, the content that I create is bilingual, to show people that our languages are as professional, scientifically legitimate than any other, and that we don't need to use colonial languages to reach more people, to be
Mm.
more visible, and so on and so forth. And so there's so many ways where in my public advocacy, I do a lot of re education around the misconceptions
Okay.
that have been internalized in our communities around language and culture.
Mm. Wow. Wow. That's interesting. Um, um, I think one of the hardest things that anyone could go through is getting backlashes from the same people you are trying to save, right?
Yes. Yes.
Um, and so I mean, I wanted to just speak a little to that because I understand even if you get a backlash from maybe I mean, as much as possible. Let me quickly make say a disclaimer for the sake of anyone who could be watching this later. So this is not any enmity against the white community or anything. All right. So
Mm-hmm.
because I know people can strangely interpret some of these
Yes.
conversations as I'm trying to
Yes.
instigate something.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely none.
No.
All right.
No.
Absolutely no. Rather, that's not the intent. All right. It's just like Sheslin said. It's just impossible that when you are trying to re-educate the black race, it's important that you have to, make it clear that we had an identity before the colonial, era and all that, and that's what we are trying to say we want to bring back. We're not saying,
Exactly.
there's something wrong with the black or the white race or they are bad people and all that. Please do not get
Mm-hmm.
any of this wrong. All right. So that being said about that, I think that should, handle all of the critics that may come up, with all of that. So I was
Mm-hmm.
going to say that. Um, I understand, of course, a bit of backlash can come from the other community, but then um, it's discouraging. I don't think it has
Mm.
any other language. When
Mm.
same people you're trying to help, I mean, you know, I have an analogy in my mind right now, but then I don't want to use it. So, the point is, how do you still, because I want you to also speak to someone who is already afraid of this kind of
Mm.
backlash.
Yes.
Maybe they
Yes.
already are figuring it out too,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, at that stage, the how do I start? I mean, if I go out, what would they say, and all of these things.
Mm.
So, but what I want you to speak to is your mental model around that. Of course, I want to
Mm.
believe for some reason you were anticipating that that would happen, right? Either because of what you've seen as you're growing up, but speaking to where you are right now, now you have actually built an identity around it. How were you able to do that successfully? At least for the
Mm.
sake of someone who may be thinking of what route as well too.
Mm-hmm. No, thank you for that. And like, I'm gonna unpack it in different ways. Also, just a quick nod to your comment about certain people trying to weaponize out of context things that we're saying. So, just to go back to what you
Yeah.
said first, there's a difference between white people and white supremacy, right? So, when we're having
Mm,
those conversations, we're talking about white supremacy, which is a political and ideological system and infrastructure that is systemic. And then any race can partake in white supremacy, right? So it's an invention
mm,
that promotes one race, but can be used by any race. And that's why when you meet
mm,
certain communities of color, you're going to have people that are going to internalize white supremacy as a way to try to elevate themselves. You know what I mean? And so, to your point, like you said, it's
mm,
making it very clear the distinctions and the words that we use. And to go back to your point about,
mm,
how do we create mental fortitude when we're doing groundbreaking work? That means that you're going to
mm,
be oftentimes misunderstood, that you may be
mm,
alienated as well, and that the very people that you seek to empower may be the very first ones at times to reject you and to invalidate your work and even your identity. It makes me
yeah.
think, I think it's a quote that's been attributed to Harriet Tubman, who said like there's so many more I could have saved if only they knew that they were enslaved, right? So I think that
Mm,
there are many things. One, when I do this work, I don't look to the individual, I look beyond them and I look at the system. So some people, when they come at you, it's not Shislin or so and so that's quote unquote attacking me. It's the conditioning in them that is reacting, to the
yeah.
work that I do, right? So I'm able to
Yeah.
divorce and to tell apart a person from their ideologies, and also their ideologies from their conditioning. So I'm able to tell those things
Mm,
apart. And then the other thing as well is sometimes backlash based on where it's coming from is an indication of success. Because if I do the
yeah.
work that I do and white supremacists are comfortable around me, I'm not doing a very good job. So again,
Yeah.
backlash, depending on the source of it, is a confirmation that my work is, bearing fruits and that I'm being successful. The other thing
Yeah.
is, there are people out there that understand the work that I do and actually support it. And it just so happens at times that those people may not be the people that I thought or expected or secretly wanted. So it's to say
Mm.
that I like to look outside of my community as well, because there are other indigenous communities in the world that are dealing with their own version of the same systemic issue. And so
Yeah.
sometimes when I look at communities that are indigenous in other parts of the world and are a lot more advanced in this mission than my own community or myself, it helps me because I have brothers and sisters and non-binary kin that I can look to, and we are part of this coalition network of solidarity. So I think the other thing that
Mm-hmm.
is important is to have a support system that doesn't need to be your family, your immediate family, or your friends. So people who see
Mm.
what you're doing, that understand what you're doing, and can also be aspirational figures for you, like mentors. So that's why I'm so
Yeah.
invested in what's going on all over the world. I look at, other indigenous community in Turtle Island here, like the Yanigahiga Nation. I also look to Africa through group like Tayari Live, like Odonife History, and they understand it, they get it.
Mhm.
Because when you choose to live up to your purpose and you want to, do work that has to do with social impact, your community won't always be big, but it can be mighty. And so it's about directing your
Mhm.
focus to the right places. So when I have
Mhm.
encounters, say with you, with your team, it galvanizes me. And I do not need to have a
Mm.
lot of that for it to carry me far and wide. And so I think it's about
Mm.
selectivity. When you know who your people are and you allow them to be there for you in ways that may surprise you, you end up not needing
Mm.
to have a lot of people to realize that you're building your own village. So I think for me, that was this
Yeah.
other piece.
Yes.
My village
Mm.
doesn't need to be local to be strong, and it doesn't need to be
Mhm.
big for it to be mighty. And so that
Mhm.
to me keeps me humble, and also history. We have so many pioneers, and so many of our ancestors are true revolutionaries. And so a lot of my mentors are people that are deceased. They don't need to be alive
Oh.
for the legacy to be there. And so when I sit at the feet of our ancestors, I'm thinking about people like Toussaint, Dessalines, other folks like that. They resurrect this fire in me that reminds me that I'm not crazy for doing this. I am not alone. And I also consume independent media that helps me identify other contemporaries that are also unsung heroes that are doing the work in their own niche and corner of the world. And I use that as inspiration to keep it going, and it also helps me spiritually and mentally. And then one of the last things, too, for me that's so important is therapy, because I find that this work is demanding and it's also triggering because I'm doing
Yeah.
healing, right? Healing presupposes
Yeah.
a pre existing condition of trauma. So you cannot do healing without being faced with some version of a trauma. And the work that I do is
Mm.
deeply personal. So it means that it has a potential to trigger very deep personal traumas and scars. And so I
Mm.
found resources that make access to therapy free, or they have pay what you
Mm.
can programs as well. So there's platforms like Sharewell. It's free international peer support groups, and they have
Mm.
sessions going every day. I also have this group that I
Wow.
found here in Canada. So it's pay what you can. So I pay $3 for a 1 hour therapy session every week. So their name,
Wow.
yeah, Moving Forward Family Services. And they do that through an internship program. So you get almost free counseling from intern counselors that are building up their experience and hours so that they can get their full license. And so I get support in multiple ways. I have to diversify my support system so that I don't go crazy, so that my work stays sustainable as well. Yeah.
I mean, that part of saying that I don't go crazy, it's very true. Because
Yeah.
I think when something touches the depth of your being, I mean, you you
Mhm.
you don't know yourself beginning to cross the boundaries to, in the
Mhm.
name of, I mean, and that's I mean that's really rich. Honestly, it's really rich. So I mean, I don't know. You could be watching this later on, or maybe you're live with us right now. I really hope that has been very helpful. I mean, I'm more of a language evangelist,
Mhm.
but
Mhm.
thing that Sheslin says, for me, it's like I said, when I was going to introduce her, I mentioned, I said her passion, it's very energetic. It could actually power the entire earth, and I think you're saying that for yourself now. So, okay, I want us to, I mean, just quickly touch base on some of the things that really has to do with the main topic that we have today.
Yes.
So
Yes.
there are definitely a lot of parents out there.
Mhm.
When I was researching on the statistics around this, it was really staggering, and it's amazing that what I want to believe there will be some major work in partnership with definitely what Tayari is doing to really close this gap and help
Mhm.
parents in diaspora to be able to, handle this. It's actually a real issue. Sometimes when you hear things about language preservation, heritage preservation, it just feels like it's something that is emotional. Maybe someone just trying
Exactly.
to look
Yes.
for, I'm here, but no, it's beyond
Mhm.
that actually. It's
Mhm.
definitely beyond that. So let's start with what's it called? I have some things that are already documented here. So let's
Mm.
start with um, non-fluent parents right
Mhm.
now, right?
Mhm.
Who desire to actually have their kids be able to connect both
Mm.
with the language and with
Mm.
the culture,
Mm.
but for some reason themselves,
Mm.
they don't even have it on the inside. So
Yeah.
let's quickly speak to that. How do
Yeah.
we? I mean, let's speak to
Mhm.
the feeling that they have that they are not adequate themselves. What do they do to close those gaps? And another thing that I mean you could speak to that. So let's speak to that.
Sure. And so to make the connection between everything we said leading up to now to the topic, why I feel it's also such a powerful way to start the conversation is because to understand why we have this epidemic, if you want, of a lot of our, African and Afro-descendant parents who are not in a position to raise children themselves, but then are not fluent in the language of their own heritage. A lot of it has to do with some of the stuff that I've shared, even, or that we've been talking about, and we've had those
Mhm.
conversations ourselves. So understanding why it happens also gives tools for better, more intentional and conscious parenting. So for one, whether or not you're, living back home in Africa and the continent or in the diaspora, the reality that we've been faced with is that you go to school. Oftentimes, the official languages are going to be, a lot of them, colonial. So already that's a
Yes.
barrier that makes it very difficult to sustain our heritage, even through our own physical institutions, right? And then there's also this thing that when they want you to speak right,
Mhm.
they don't want you to speak your indigenous language. You have to code switch. You have to speak English, or French or what have you in many environments.
Mhm.
And so what it creates internally is this dialogue that runs through the mind of a parent, that to set your kid up for success, the kid has to abandon different parts of their heritage, or else it becomes a hindrance for their ability to be fully developed, matured, and have access to all the opportunities that this world has to offer, right? So there are a lot of those connections. And then, like I said, for people like myself, when you live in an environment where your culture is a minority, if you're not intentional about
Mm.
your parenting, what's going to happen is the dominant culture where you live is going to make your child's education for you through its own languages, right? So wherever you live, it's
Yes.
a reality that affects you. The question is now, what can you do to be able to counteract the social pressure. So for me, when I look at even like say non-fluent parents, a lot of the time is what you have situations when you had people that used to be fluent, but then they spent so much time living abroad and not having an intentional parenting mindset
Yeah.
that they lost it over time. So you also see that. You see also situations of people like myself, you're a second generation or first generation, but you're born and raised most of your life in an environment that is completely different from your heritage. And again, when there's not the presence of
Mhm.
intentional parenting, you end up assimilating into the dominant language and culture, right?
Yeah.
And so those are some of the realities in the landscape that we have to deal with. And just like a quick nod to a point that you've made, because for some parents are like, I don't see why that's a problem, you know? Anyway,
Yeah.
when you work,
Mm.
you're not going to work in Yoruba, you're not going to work in Kiswahili, you're not going to work. And, so why does it matter? I've had those conversations with a lot of aunties and uncles and my own parents, like, why do you make a big deal out of it? And it's for so many reasons, right? If you want the ability to work in your languages need to be alive. So that's the first thing, right?
Yes.
Because we're
Yeah.
preparing for the future. The reality that we're in is not the desirable end state that we want for our culture, for our children or generation ourselves,
Mhm.
but we're in a position where
Mhm.
we are kind of like the frontliners. If we don't do it, who will? Now we're going to self perpetuate a reality where now it might even never become an option to hear those languages
Mm.
spoken, let alone to be able to work in them. Then there's also the other
Mhm.
thing, a bit of a pushback. I started doing more research, and I do find careers where you can work successfully in our indigenous languages. It's just that they're not
Yeah.
as well known or as
Yeah.
promoted. So that's actually strike one against that so called argument. The other thing as well is when you
Mm.
think about different industries like technology or innovation, there's a lot less ability for the world to be able to be as technologically aware, self-sufficient, or intelligent when the totality of scientific research is only conducted in one hegemonic language or culture, right? So our ability to keep our
Mm.
languages alive and well, not just at home but through our institutions, it's almost our guarantee that we're going to live in a world, and that our children's will live in a world that is a lot more economically, politically, ideologically, and scientifically strong, because we have diversity of thought.
Yeah.
When you're conditioned to think and operate in one language and culture all the time, it means that there are so many resources, there's so many information that you're never ever going to consider, because you have this one way of looking at the world that is starting to become like a
Mhm.
bias and a limitation. So just on why
Mm.
does it matter, period, to consider our languages, let alone in parenting, there are a lot of arguments that can be made for that. And when we bring it down to the
Mm.
reality of a parent, how do you raise, a child to be bilingual and fluent in your native indigenous African language? There are many different things. For one, you don't need to be fluent for your child to be fluent. Um, and I've seen it happen
Mm.
a lot, particularly here in the diaspora, because when we've had parents, for example, that needed to, I don't know, access basic services here, or had some legal
Mm.
situation, often the child would be parentified, as we say here in the West, and the child would become the actual interpreter. So the child was able to translate back to their parent what they needed to be able to fill out government document, show up for specific interviews. And so the child took on that responsibility because of a need that the parent had that the society and the system here couldn't meet. So it's an interesting thing because
Mm.
my parent didn't teach me the language, but out of necessity, I ended up becoming a linguistic resource for my entire family network. And to this day, I have
Oh
calls from
wow.
aunties and uncles that ask me to translate a document, to be an interpreter for something for them. And they're not necessarily
Wow.
fluent themselves, right? So when you're thinking of, okay, as a parent, without needing to put my child under that level of stress or responsibility, how can I help them become fluent? There are many things. For one, there's obviously platforms like and organizations like Tayari Live, right? So signing up your child
Yeah.
to like a summer camp, to language classes is one thing. The other thing is you can, as a non-fluent parent, learn alongside your child. So you can bond with your children through
Yeah.
learning experiences. So you make it fun,
That's
you
correct.
normalize making mistakes, you're bonding, so you're going to have inside jokes that are going to happen. You also
Mm-hmm.
relieve that child of the pressure to perform and be perfect, because their parent is normalizing showing up, having questions, making mistakes, but staying consistent. So I think for a
Mm.
non-fluent parent, beyond outsourcing, language learning to institutions, to tutors, to summer camps, what's really going to be a pivot and a foundation is using your own language learning as a teaching, bonding, and parenting tool for your child. Because now you
That's good.
can bond through play, through fun, through
Mm-hmm.
adventure, and there's no stress or pressure or quote unquote unsustainable expectation, because you're both more or less at the same level. So that's very encouraging for
Yes.
the child.
Mm.
Um, Other things as well that can be interesting, it's like positive reinforcement, because too often we look at it through the lens of negative reinforcement. What's going to happen if you don't speak the language? So I was looking this up as well online, and there are things that I'm doing at home and even in my own church, where every time the child speaks the language consistently with you, then they can get a little token, and it can buy them privileges like fun adventures that you're going to experience together in the language, right? So I find
Yeah,
that this is another
exactly.
way to make it fun, because I came from the
Yeah.
tradition of, oh, if you don't speak the language, then I'm going to discipline you. We know what that means. I came from the
Mm.
tradition of being shamed for speaking and making mistakes.
Mm.
And so we can
Mm.
replace that. Other things that we can do, and this is also applicable for fluent parents, is game night. So, for example, back home, we have so many traditional games that my parents would use when they were children or adults. Like we have card games, we have a bunch of stuff. We're really big into storytelling. And so it's about creating family traditions. Like for me, for
Mm.
example, like Fridays, it's starting to become Friday night. It's game night. So game night, now we dig up all fun games that don't require money. So we have games that we call mab. So you have like little pebbles that you use, and you dig up holes in the ground. And so that's like a Haitian traditional game that my parents would play in their village. We have a bunch of card games. We have dominoes. So when you make it fun and it's a bonding collective experience, the child is going to ask you for it. You won't have to chase the child down for them to want to
Exactly.
participate, right? So I
Exactly.
think is, what are family traditions that you can set up that can make it easy to make language learning a bonding moment? Then it's having game night, movie night, things like that that make it fun and engaging. Another thing, like I said, is outsourcing some technical, grammatical elements of language learning to experts or professionals like teachers and tutors and so on, or summer camps. Another thing too that I've seen is online. Now you have more and more organizations that focus on, African indigenous language preservation, that offer cooking classes, dance classes online. So it would be amazing to learn how to cook traditional meals, right, with your child together. So you put the screen, and then you're in the kitchen and you do it together, and then after a while you can do it on your own. So you can use
Mm.
those tools to help create traditions, even routines, because you have traditions that can happen one day of the week, but then you have routines that can happen many times a day, many times a week. I've also seen, for example, videos of parents from different cultures that share how they are helping their kids fall in love with speaking and learning the language. So, one of them,
Wow.
they showed their babies from a young age how to cook basic stuff, like, but traditional food. But the whole time you are
Mm.
speaking the language together. And so now the kid is looking forward to, to doing it. And so you give the kids, like, the eggs and whatever ingredients they need. And then you say, okay, you can make it a contest. Okay, cook, let's make like a cooking competition. We're going to see who stays better in 15 minutes. There's so many ways that you can make it fun and dynamic. Another thing that
Yeah.
I do with my brother as well, every week we kind of rate our relationship based on fun. So, and how much fun did you have this week using the language? Okay, this week we get a 5 out of 10. Maybe we get a 8 out of 10. Okay, what could we do better so that next week is a 7 or a 9 out of 10? Could say,
Yeah.
mom, I love sports. Okay, then maybe we can figure out a way to integrate that with some language practice. Or, mom, I really love, I don't know, I found this show on YouTube, and it's in Yoruba. I really want us to check that out. Cuz I think the problem with like the parenting mentality is it's too static, it's not dynamic, right? And it's a
Mm.
bit the mindset of, it's like when we look, for sake of a comparison, couples that last. And a lot of people are going to say you never stop dating your partner, right? So some
Yeah.
people, after marriage, romance is gone. And I feel like you want to have a bit of that mentality about, parenting your child to become fluent. You want it to be so that every week there's a reset. What worked, what didn't?
Mm.
And then you learn from your child's feedback to figure out ways to make that an adventure or a traditional routine that the child is excited to do the next day, where you don't have to apply pressure or the same level of focus for those strategies to be internalized by your child. So those, I think,
Mm.
are a lot of different ways that you can make it happen. Another one too was to build a village for yourself. So there are different ways that you can connect to elders. I remember at some point during COVID, I was volunteering for a nonprofit, and I was basically making phone calls to elders that were in, seniors residence, and a lot of them of immigrants, and they do not speak, French or English here. And so, me making those
Mhm.
phone calls to them in their language, they were so excited to hear from me. And they kind of adopted me as
Wow.
their little brainchild. And so it's very possible that in a lot of our communities, there are resources catering to elders, and we can sign up to
Mm.
be volunteers and support them. And now we have an extra or a bonus, a grandparent, and now we can help our child have a village around them of people that are different ages, live in different parts of the world, but we all communicate through our indigenous languages, right? And they're excited to have those calls and to have those conversations. And every person brings a part of culture with them that is unique, and it means also that you,
Mhm.
as a parent, don't have to carry on your shoulders the totality of your child's immersive ability to become fluent. You have so many resources and
Mm.
people that can show up for you. So for me, connecting to organizations that that take care of, different community members, and who happen to speak Yoruba, who happen to speak Kiswahili, has been another way to create a village and a community of people that now are starting to feel and become like family to me. And they're more than happy to
Mm.
share the heritage forward with the next generation. And it doesn't have to be me, it can be my children, So those are other
Yeah.
ways that I'm able to pass this on. And then one last thing too that I can share is for people who are connected to culture and language through faith, our churches can also be beautiful ways to help create immersive communities, right? So me, for example,
Okay, that.
no, I'm saying, so I started going back to, I found a local church and they're Haitians. And when I tell you, I want to be here, like worship is, it's something else. Like the music, we have drum, we have everything. It's a vibe. So anything that you do that is a vibe, your child is going to want to be there. And what I love with
Yeah.
environments like that, you see all generations, from the grandma to the grandchild. Everybody's dancing,
Mm,
talking, community bonding. People never want to leave. After the service, we're still there
mm,
talking. And so when you bring your child
wow.
along to community spaces like that, they naturally gravitate. And because over there, your native language is the norm over there. So if
Yeah. Yeah.
they want to talk to a friend, they're going to talk in Yoruba to talk with grandma, to the friend, to the pastor, to the next
Yes.
person. And you
Yeah.
can also do this online because nowadays, we have people live streaming their services on YouTube for free. So all I'm saying is, if you have fun, naturally that's contagious. And if you are
Yes.
intentional about having other people that you can bring in to your parenting life, they're also going to become cultural co-parents to your child, right? So then your church
Mm,
community creates opportunities for your child to learn. Then you have, like I said, community centers that connect you to other fluent speakers, and you showing up to those events, your child is a part of that. You figuring out ways to create routines, traditions, game nights, that your child is looking forward to. And now play and fun become your best educational tool for your child. So there's so many different
mm,
ways that you can do that. So it's all about a diversification of tools and about building a
yeah.
community around you that makes the language necessary, just as necessary as fun, right? It doesn't feel like an
Mm,
obligation. It feels like a way to
yeah.
bond better and faster. And my last point on that
Mm,
is play dates. I remember we had one of our cousins at some point who came to live with us for a few years, and he happened to be more fluent in English. And it was fascinating to see how quickly my brother started picking up on the language because he wanted to play with his cousin, right? And I've had situations like that
oh.
too. Yeah. So every time my brother would come to me and he said, "Oh, I want to tell my son how to do that. How do you say that?" And the next thing you know, he's giving orders in English. He's telling people what to do. He's playing, and then he's becoming more autonomous because his intrinsic motivation is, I have a friend and I like
He
him.
wants to connect.
And I want to play with him. It's not about mom. It's not about a class that I have to take. Is I want to play with my friend. And so
Mm-hmm.
finding spaces where your child can create genuine, authentic connections with other children. And it just so happened that they speak Yoruba. It just so happened that they speak Ewe, they speak Fon, and then the kid wants to naturally play more. So that is also
Mm,
very helpful. So like I said, is you're building an ecosystem. It's not just you all the
mm,
time. Is the play
yeah.
dates, is the church, is the elders, is the classes, it's summer camp, is movie night. And another thing for me was movies. There's so many movies
Mm,
that I've bonded with my parents over, and the movie is in Creole, and the movie is actually good, so I'm paying attention. You know what I mean? So
mm,
whenever my mom too, it's happened that sometimes she sees I'm watching, even recently I'm watching a show in Italian, but the show is so good because the tea is good.
mm.
Now my mom is picking up on a few words so that she can watch with me. And so and anything that you're passionate about that you can present to your child through the language gives them another anchor to associate the culture with fun, with play, and
With
with
yeah,
immersion, right? So
yeah,
and I try to
yeah.
do that as much as possible. So it could be great to have a Nigerian playlist. So, I have a thing that I call my Haitian Netflix. So I have days
Oh,
or mornings. I'm only watching content in my language, but it's good stuff. I found the good stuff. And then if I have friends or people
mm.
around, it's like, oh girl, what's that? I want to lean in. And so they're learning a few words, even if they're not my babies, but it's just you make it fun, and then it's a tradition. And so if you do that with your child, now they're hooked. They're like, oh, mommy, like what happened in the episode, with so and so, she was so mean to her friend. But all of that, it's happening in your language. So I feel
Language.
like,
Mm.
sometimes as parents, we can almost be forceful with how much we want the child to become fluent, that we don't understand the power of fun and play and connection in language education.
Very,
You know, if
very
your child
important.
sees you having fun, they want to have fun too. When I see my mom
Exactly.
also she's a gossip. So my mom is a gossip girl. I want to know the gossip too. I lean in. Oh, she did that. Oh, she did that, girl. So if you make it fun and you're consistent, you won't have to worry. Your child is going to be able to live up to that experience with you as well.
Awesome, awesome. Thank you so much. I mean, what you said finally, I was actually the question I was going to ask you about.
Mm,
Someone right now feel like, Chess, this is a lot of mental load. You said a lot of things. I don't
mm-hmm.
even think my job is going to allow me to be able to do all of this. But again, like you rightly
Mm,
said, it takes a measure of being intentional. I mean,
mm-hmm.
again, um, for parents who are in situations like this, it's not going to happen
No,
like
it's
a
a
walk in the park.
process.
It will take,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it will take a bit of, should I say, a bit of sweat and blood? Would that be correct? Take a bit of
Mm-hmm.
sweat, basically.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But
Yes.
yeah, um, great point about, I mean, associating the language with fun.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the language every child understands. Every child understands
Mm-hmm.
fun. It doesn't
Yes,
matter what language you speak in.
that's true.
As long as their emotions can interpret that this is fun, this is exciting,
Mm-hmm.
this does not have any, in quote, any rules around it that will restrict me.
Yes,
You know,
exactly.
it definitely becomes something they want to lean in. I mean, I never even knew that. I mean, gossip was something else. Maybe I would start
Ah,
including that as one of my.
yes. You want to know the tea, you're gonna learn today. That's what I'm saying. Okay. It's a good motivator. A lot of people would be more fluent if there was a lot more of a, you know.
I totally
Mm,
agree. I totally agree. Okay, so I think that was really rich for any what's it called, any parent who's not fluent. So let's speak a
mm,
little bit to those who, the parents who have a grasp of the language and
mm.
they feel the obligation to be the teacher. I mean, you
Yeah.
said a lot of
Oh,
things tangentially about, not being too forceful and all that, but I think we need to, I
yes.
mean, let's shove it into a real conversation so that
Mm-hmm.
any parent it's following can also, I mean, pick some one or two things.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. And also to go back to that, everything that we said for the non-fluent applies to the fluent parent as well. But like you said, with some distinctions that we're going to get into in a second. And also, just quickly to go back
Mm-hmm.
to a very great point that you made, it can feel like, okay, now the world feels the sky's the limit. Because sometimes we feel like our toolkit, as an intentional parent raising bilingual children, we feel like it's very small. Because again, there's not a lot of information that is mainstream about multilingual child rearing. And so we assume that we have to
Mm-hmm.
only sign our kid up for all the classes and then we can speak here and there, and that's about it. But to your point, now that we've kind of opened up the gamut and people have a greater sense of what is possible, now the next emotion that happens is overwhelmed. It's like, oh my goodness, I have a job, I have this, I have that, I don't have time. So, something that I want to address that you mentioned that is applicable to all the parents that we're talking to right now is that Now you have a sense of what's possible. The idea is to baby step your way into it. It's not to go from zero to
Yeah.
100 tomorrow. And there are different things
Yeah.
that you can do to support your way through that. Like you can start with the first thing, and then once that one habit or routine is consolidated, then you build upon it, right? So one of the first thing
Yeah.
that can be done, right, is signing your kid up for a summer camp or a class. Why? Well, it doesn't require any capacity from you. You outsource that. So that is something very easy and simple
Mm.
that you can do. That's not going to require you time, capacity, thinking, energy, anything. So you just sign your kid up.
Mhm.
So that's one thing that you can start with. Another thing now after that is starting to
Absolutely.
think with your child. And that's a conversation that you can have. You can share with your kid, growing up, back home, those are the kind of things that I love to do as a child. And then you present it to them, and then you can pick and choose together what activities does your child resonate with most. So you say, oh mom, I really want to learn how to play map. It sounds so cool. I want to do like you and grandpa and dad and all of the okay, cool. So we're gonna do that, right? So then together you can kind of figure out fun activities that can start becoming the pillar of fun immersion into the language. And then what you can do is
Mm.
once you've selected things that you can do together in the language, now it's about building a little schedule around it. And you can start with a few times a week, and then now it becomes automatic, and then you can increment. And don't worry, when it's fun, the child is going to remind you. They're not going to forget. Mom, you said we're going to do this at the park. You said we were going to play this. So the child, don't worry. It's been like this with my brother. He never forgot a thing. Okay. So then you can start with that. Okay. Okay. So now you have
Yeah.
playtime. And when your child comes back from school, you can have your little traditions. And then another thing, now you can start bringing in community. Okay. Now your child is signed up for their
Mhm.
classes. Now you have family game night. You have fun activities that you do that are educational. Now you can start having other people building your village, right? So we talked about church
Mhm.
because for a lot of us, that's been a part of community building. Okay, we have church.
Yeah.
Maybe you have something else. We talk about cooking classes. Okay, cool. Now we can have cooking classes, right? So that can be step two on build to help you build that family
One.
immersion if
Mhm.
you want. Then and then the idea is now that you have activities and things, now the other thing you want to do is now you want to increment time, because sometimes you start with 15 minutes, and then now what about we trying to push it to 30 minutes, us speaking the language together
Mm.
on a more daily basis, right? So it's not always about adding more activities, is what you're doing that's working, how can you prolong that now,
And
right?
get,
And
yeah.
so and you add to it, and so there are different things that you can do. So like I said, I talked about shows. You probably watch TV as a family. What about you start switching up one of those shows for a very good drama that just happens to be in Kiswahili? Oh, now your child is hooked, and now every day at whenever the episode is dropping, it's like, mom, the episode is on now, let's go, we're gonna watch the show, let's go. And the thing is, anything
Mm.
you do that's cultural, the mental association is now we're going to do it in the language, right? So it's about you build your way up to that. And I think something that could be
Mm.
very helpful for parents as well as a parenting tool is therapy. You can have therapy
So,
to help you assess your progress without getting overwhelmed, without getting in your head, without transforming your parenting goals into a chore or burden on you as a parent, right? So as you are raising
yeah.
up
Yeah.
your little children, investing and pouring back into yourself to also build yourself up as a parent, but also as somebody who know with their own lived experience. So that was just a transition point that I think would be good for both sides of the coin. And now onto the parent who's fluent. Oh, I speak the language, I'm good, I don't need all of that stuff. Or sometimes what happens, like you and I talked about, is there are many ways in which we become our parents even as we are finding the things that we resented as a child. So I've been in situations
Yes.
where because I'm fluent, now I'm a bit impatient. Now I have a bit of an attitude. Oh, how come you don't get this? You know, and sometimes what happens to something that is a no-no especially as a fluent parent,
mm,
is to explain to the child what they do not understand in another language, right? Because you explain
mm,
something, for example, I don't know, in Yoruba, the kid didn't get it. Ah, what you don't understand. And then first impatient, second frustration, last translation. No bueno for all three. So, as a parent,
mm,
it's important that when you know a lot more than your child in one area, you don't make the child feel dumb for not understanding, for
mm,
not following, and for not being able to respond right away, right? And here again, I find that therapy is so helpful to help us see ourselves from the perspective of a child, and also to have the humility of remind ourselves of when I was that age and mom used to do to me what
mm,
I want to do to this child. How did that feel? Right? To hold ourselves in
mm,
check as well. We need, as a
mhm,
parent, no matter what, to not make the child feel, like I said, inferior, dumb, or anything like that. So I feel like in that approach, tools or things or strategies that can help is sometimes to share, to get vulnerable with your child and to share when you were their
mm,
age, how was it for you? That can also be a way to bond and to kind of slow down and to start tapping back into our patience. Another thing
mm,
too could be to I know there's so many ways that we can do that. We can turn it into like a learning activity, right? Okay, I trying to say it to you that way. What do you think? Like another way that mommy could explain it to you better, you know? So sometimes like there are little strategies like that too. So I think
mm.
one important one through line is patience, number one. Um,
Very important.
for sure, and to give this the child space. Sometimes they can be a bit slower to pick up on certain things, and that's okay. Another thing as well is the positive reinforcement that I mentioned. I feel it's so important in this instance because the danger when we're fluent is we satisfy ourselves with passive exposure. So because the child hears the language all the time doesn't mean that they're able to speak as well as they understand. And too often we get
Yes.
comfortable because I tell them to do something and they do it. Yeah, but they don't respond to you in the language. So you are helping them
Mm,
be passively fluent in terms of the passive skills, listening, maybe reading. But for the speaking and the writing, they're not able to reach the same level of comfort or fluency. And so, what I love with
mm,
strategies like positive reinforcement is like every time the child responds in the language, now there can be like a surprise or an adventure or a reward of sorts. And it's not money, it's
mm,
experience. So, like we were saying before,
mm,
there can be a system of like a little token. You have a jar. It's like, oh, mommy, I responded in Kiswahili today. Okay, go fill up the jar. Okay. And then at the end of the week, with your little tokens, now we can buy yourself an experience that you love in Yoruba. It's like, okay, mommy, I saw
mm,
like this event. I want to go, or I want us to sign up for that cooking class, or I want us to go to that Nigerian restaurant. I want to have takeout today, or I want you to buy me this beautiful dress, or I want this head wrap that I saw on sale. Like, there's so many things, right, that can fill that up because you want to be mindful of incentivizing your child to speak as much as they listen. And too often
very
in
important.
those kind of household, the child understands everything, but they're not saying much, right? It's like, mommy, respond in English. No. So we want to create conditions where it's easier for the child to be motivated emotionally and be rewarded and validated emotionally when they speak. So we want to focus on speaking more than understanding because understanding, you got that covered. That's going to be very easy for you. And often, when we're coming from when we're fluent ourselves, usually other family members may be fluent. So back to the
Mhm,
suggestion that we made prior is now to bring in your village so that they can support that learning experience. So you can have dates with grandma. There are times that the kids can stay with grandma. They can bring some games and activities, but everything in the language, it's immersive. And again, it doesn't always
mm,
have to fall on you to carry the load of the educational aspect of parenting in a bilingual environment. So if you have cousins, if you have grandmas, everybody, like, help the child build genuine, authentic relationships with them, and encourage the child to
Mhm.
have play dates with their favorite uncles. Because another thing that we got wrong growing up was I was forced to talk to family members that I do not know. So now I have a negative association. Yeah, it's like, I don't know her. It's like, oh, that's your uncle. Like when you were 3 years old in the village. I don't know this woman, right? And now you see the phone. Now I'm afraid. Now I think, oh wow, every time mom wants me to speak, she's throwing me in those weird, awkward situations when I have to talk to a
Mm,
bunch
the
of strangers who happen to be family members. I don't want to talk no more. So instead, it's looking at the doing the opposite. So we all have a favorite something. I have a favorite cousin, a favorite uncle, a favorite whatever. And so help the child nurture positive relationships that are genuine with the family members who are fluent and with whom your child has more of an affinity. Instead of blanketedly impose any fluent speaker onto the child for sake of
yeah.
promoting, like, fluency in the language. Because now I'm traumatized. Now I don't want to speak. And now I'm having this negative association between speaking the language and having to be put into socially awkward situation with random family members, right? So I feel it's important to be intentional in that way as well with that.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. I mean, I, while you were speaking about, I mean, being forced to speak with some, family members you don't know, I just remembered being in those scenarios, and I just wanted to sink into my clothes in those
Yes.
moments, right? Because
Yes.
and you see the insistence from your parents. Like, I mean, why are you not
Mm,
engaging? How am I supposed to engage? I'm not going to
I don't
engage.
know her.
You know, and then you begin to get the strange familiarity from the person saying, like, hey, look, stay in your lane. Don't come near me right now, right?
Exactly.
So, yeah, I mean, I mean, one thing one load bearing idea I think I'm also pulling out from all of this is that
Mm,
it really takes a lot of intelligence to really
mm,
get this done. It
mm-hmm,
can't it can't be done randomly. It can't
mm-hmm.
be, like you said, it can't be done with impatience. There has to the preference of the child also has to be a huge
Yeah,
consideration in the method
exactly.
that will be used. So that makes a lot of sense. Thank you so much. I mean, that makes a lot of sense. I want to absolutely speak to
Mm,
um, I think it was my conversation with you prior to
mm-hmm.
this moment that, I mean, that actually um, became a thing in my mind. So there are times when some parents, and I think this is really more of a challenge for the fluent ones, they
Mm,
assume that you know creating that environment where the child hears the language and then there is passive understanding, like you said. Of course, you already encourage that the goal should be more of speaking than just understanding and all that.
yes.
So there is this part as well where the parent assumes
Mm-hmm.
that that equates learning the culture.
Mm, mm, mm-hmm,
So
mm-hmm.
there is I mean,
Yeah.
should I say the culture shock thing? Let me say, for an
Yes.
example, in Yoruba, we've spoken Yoruba all like in the last 3, 4, 5 years at home. And then here we go to interact with other Yoruba people. And I'm out there saying, Bawoni, or I'm saying like, I'm referring to an elderly person the same way I've referred to a younger person. And in Yoruba, it should
Mm,
not be. There is a culture
I
for
see.
how that's exactly. So language,
Totally. Oh, that's good. That's
I mean,
good.
the
I
parent
love
can.
that. I love that. So no, you're so right because and we were having these conversations as well, right? Because it brings up to mind a few different things. So like you said, being
Mm,
fluent in the language is not the same as being culturally fluent. And you can have both
mm,
separately, but we try to bring those two together, to your point. Because
mm,
I can know all the grammar and everything and I can speak very fluently, but then language exists within the context of culture. For example, there are expressions that we use, people repeat and they don't think about it, but it comes from a cultural background, it has meaning. So for example, just stuff like inshallah, God willing, that comes from a spiritual religious mindset, but people sometimes they use it without knowing the ramifications of that, the context in which it can be used, and so on and so forth. And beyond that, like you said, there are instances where the form of address for an elder versus a child cannot be the same in a lot of cultures.
Yeah.
But if you don't know that, to your point, there are some cultural faux pas that you can make. Or beyond that, it's just cultural awareness. I remember for me, for example, you can speak the language, but if you're put in a certain environment, you struggle to understand the conversation because they keep making cultural references. They talk about things that you've never, so you
Mm.
understand what they're saying in terms of the words, but you don't understand, like they're talking about the educational system. You don't know about that, about the culture, right? Or they're talking about politics or news or what's happening right now in the country. You're not following that, so you're not able to keep up. Or another thing is cultural norms or protocols or etiquette, right? So when you first meet someone, there's a way to, to greet that person versus, sometimes a stranger versus sometimes at work. And so you're not aware sometimes as a child of all those different layers. And that is a part of your culture that language will not give you automatic access to if it was not something that you
Yes.
intentionally sought out. And instances where you can have that kind of culture shock is when you leave your immediate nuclear family and you now start interacting with other community members that are also fluent. That's when you realize that there's a gap because they behave in a way that
Yeah.
you don't understand. They keep making
Yeah.
references to things that you don't follow. Then the content of their
Mm.
conversation is different because they may not have a Western ideology. And so the focus of what they choose to talk about, it's all topics that you don't have access to because of culture. It's one thing to say, I speak
Mm.
Yoruba and I'm talking about, I don't know, American culture. It's another thing to speak your language and now you're talking about elements that are central to the culture. And this can happen in the diaspora
Mm.
as well. It depends what neighborhood you're in. It depends like who you're talking to. If it's not mom and dad, are you able to keep up a full conversation where culture is also a part of the exchange, right? And then some of the most obvious
Mhm.
situations is when you do travel. Say you travel for the summer, you go visit the family and everything. Now you're completely lost because you had no
Mm.
idea about the cultural norms of the entire environment. And what you have experienced at home, it's living Yoruba in America, which is not the same than having Yoruba within the, you know what I mean? So it's like it's completely different. And and
Yeah.
I think that's something that gets overlooked so much, to your point, because too often, because of a lack of access to culturally aware education for parents, like you said, we assume that language is culture. And if I expose my child to
Mm.
one, it automatically makes them fluent, and the other, it does not, right? And so that's why I feel it's so important because if you think about it, language is a tool, it's not the content. The content is culture. So it's almost like, for example, if I think of social media, I can go on Instagram, Facebook, whatever, and I can talk about anything. The platform
Mhm.
tells me where I'm talking or how I'm talking about it. It doesn't tell me what I'm talking about. So what I'm talking about is what is also important. So for me, growing up, I had the opposite. My parents were talking to me in French about our culture without me being allowed to respond in Creole. So I had the
Oh.
cultural awareness, but I didn't have the linguistic fluency. And then as an adult, I
Mm.
taught myself the language, right? So that I could reconcile those two parts that often are dissociated for a lot of us in our parenting and just in our childhoods. So to your points, even if we go back to a lot of the tools and the strategies that we shared, Those are all mediums. So they give you something to do. Now you need to fill that up with content, right? So again,
Mhm.
you sign your child up to have a class. The class is about grammar, so it's very technical. It can be mechanical, but you might also want your child to then have a class that's about history. So now you're learning about Nigeria history, but you happen to be delivering that in Yoruba, so it's different. You want to have a 360 approach and not just do one without the other. So because, or else, like you're
Mm,
saying, it's weird, you're kind of stranger to your culture, but you're fluent in the language, if that makes sense, right?
mm,
So like you said, you
mm,
want to be
mm.
mindful of that, because I can talk to you in English about African history. I'm still not fluent though in Yoruba, you know what I'm saying? Like I'm still missing something else. And to your point, that's such a vital element to keep in mind. And that's why I tend to look at language as a vehicle, but it's not the content. The content has to be the culture. So for me, something that was cool is I would have those conversations about politics and culture with my parents every day. Now I have the benefit of doing that while also being speaking Creole with my parents, right? So then we're able to reconcile those things. So what it can look like for a parent without making it something that can feel big or overwhelming is, listen, even as you're cooking, knowing the history of those foods, the traditions, like where does that come from, mom? You know what I mean? Because we're always drinking certain, like, I know for me, I always had question as a child, like, oh, why do we eat that? And then it opened up the conversation to my dad explain, well, in Haiti we have 5 departments, and this department is historically known from being the biggest producer of rice in Haiti. And so that's why, okay, now we're unpacking things. Now I have access to culture and history. Now that's the content of our conversation, right? Which is separate from the language. Or I would ask questions to my parents about how life was for them growing up. And then they would explain things to me about geography, where the village was located. They were explaining to me the educational system. So how it worked versus what I am used to here in Canada. So I think helping the child get curious is a way to make sure that the content of your parenting is also going to be cultural, because children always have questions.
Mm.
Their favorite is
Yeah,
why mom, why that. And so if
yeah.
you're able to leverage that as you are speaking the language, automatically the child is going to help you beef up the cultural element of your parenting,
Mm.
right? So, and then
Awesome.
sometimes you don't know why the child asks you, I have to look it up. I have to ask grandma. I don't know why, she would do certain things, because sometimes we have superstitions, but superstition is cultural.
Yeah,
There's a reason why we
yeah.
do or we don't do certain things. So to your point, culture is so important, and it's too often dissociated from the language element. So it's important to think
Mm,
of like history. How can we make that a more ongoing part of our conversations? Like for me, it came up in, sometimes we have expressions even in English. Oh, it's raining cats and dogs. There's no cats or dogs falling from the sky. So why do we say that in English? And then I remember I had people ask me that, so we looked it up, and the reason is cultural. So now when I'm speaking, I know the cultural explanation to the
for that.
words that I use, and I understand where it's coming from.
Mm,
Or when we watch TV
mm,
together, there are series that were iconic culturally in Haiti that now I watch as an adult here in Canada, that give me access to culture. So now when I'm talking to
mm,
like a fellow Creole speaker, I'm able to bond with them because I have a lot of the same cultural references. When they talk about
mm,
Languichat, when they talk about like big iconic people in the culture space, I'm able to keep up because I know what they're talking about. I know who they're talking about, and things like that. So that helps.
Awesome. Awesome. You said something that really stuck with me. Language is the vehicle, the culture is the
Hmm.
content. That's really
Yes.
powerful. Really powerful. Really powerful. Okay. So I think I already know exactly what we're going to speak on the next time that we're going to be having you. So
Sure.
we're going to be blowing up this particular component of the conversation around
I like that.
infusing the culture and the language, because I think a lot of parents, even in all honesty, I'm in Nigeria currently, and even for
Mm-hmm.
me as a parent, I must be honest with you, I'm very guilty of that. I
Mm-hmm.
am extremely
I feel you.
guilty.
I
I
feel
have
you.
a 2 year old, and as much as I do everything to speak the language, when I want
Mm.
him to go pick his chair, when he wants to have his meal, I use the local language. He responds, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the culture, because there are certain
Mm.
things that I'm just, oh my goodness, Busola, you're actually not deliberately infusing the culture, you're just using the language, and for you that's satisfying enough, right? So
Mm-hmm.
in all honesty, I think it's something that most parents really need to, you know, need to really, really work on it. And again, I understand, because for most parents, it just feels more like an optional nice to have. And I think it's one
Exactly.
thing we should, every parent needs to really watch it, all right? That, passing down culture and
Mm-hmm.
language is not optional. It should be something that should be very deliberate. The same way we teach
Exactly.
children, moral excellence, expecting them to be well behaved in public, and all of those things, because it
Mm-hmm.
makes for a huge component, uh, as they begin to what they begin to accept of themselves as their identity. Of course, not
Mm-hmm.
superstitions like you rightly said. What they
Mm-hmm.
begin to accept of themselves as their identity, some of these things will begin to heavily contribute into it. And
Mm-hmm.
again, I mean, let me repeat that what you said. The language is the vehicle, but
Mm-hmm.
the culture itself is the actual content. That's really powerful. I mean, I'm not gonna forget that anytime soon. I'm not gonna
Mm.
forget it anytime soon.
No.
Um, Okay, so I knew we were going to have this challenge, and I mean, I'm very happy. I'm very happy we
I knew
had
it.
the challenge. We're past 1 hour 30 minutes already, and just for the sake of our audience who would want to relive the experience, I don't want the time. We don't want the time stamp. So we're definitely going to having Sheslin again that we had in mind to talk about. There are still some things here. Third culture kids. We're supposed to talk about that, the challenges, and the roots and all that. We're still going to talk about that, but that'll be in another live
Yes.
session. So if you're watching this live or you're watching at another time, let me know what languages you speak. Let's know how some of these things have spoken to you. Let's know what areas of needs either it has met, and of course kindly leave us feedbacks too if there's something you feel, I mean, our conversation did not exhaustively touch.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely I'm open to hearing from you, so that we could, these conversations are primarily to aid you. They're primarily
Mm-hmm.
to help you do what you're already doing better, offload the burden of, you know, heritage preservation and all of that. We know this
Mm.
problem is real.
Yes.
I mean, I'm actually glad that it now has a vocabulary that we can case it into. All right. We know the
Mm-hmm.
challenge. Yeah, many parents are going through this and not even knowing it's a problem, right? For them,
Mm-hmm.
as long as they can provide, they can connect, allow the child have the chocolate, allow them play their PlayStation console, they feel they are doing good. But no, there is more. There's
Mm-hmm.
actually more. If we're really going to do this parenting thing, you know, appropriately. I think there is a saying that says that, I mean, until you pass down your heritage,
Mm.
you've not really, really passed down something good to your children. Again, that's very subjective. I understand that
Mm-hmm.
we're not talking about superstition here, but
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
what really, really, really matters. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I'm hoping that, I mean, by the time we begin to get feedback from everyone, we can also hear your own unique perspective to these
Mm.
conversation that myself and Shes have had today as well. So, Shes,
Mm.
thank you so much. I would want to give you like some maybe 2 minutes. Any
Oh,
final words? Something you feel? I mean,
yeah.
someone out there really. Yeah.
I mean, to your point, and we're coming. back full circle with the beginning of this. Why does it matter? Because to your point, for a lot of people, those conversations is optional, it's emotional in a negatively loaded way. But at the end of the day, you're Black. You're going to be Black everywhere and anywhere. And if you're not strongly
Yeah.
rooted in the understanding of the power that comes with that identity, the world will invent a definition for you. And you cannot be
Come
Black
on.
and know who you are and not be connected to your ancestral culture. That's impossible. And I've seen it so often. It
Mm.
doesn't matter where you're born. The minute you're confronted with a challenge in your life or a judgment or a barrier that's going to try to weaponize your difference and the power of being Black and trying to tell you that that's a liability that makes you less than, your child is not going to be able to engage the world within the power that they already have, because they don't know what it means to be Black and free, because they don't know who they are.
Come on.
And so language and
Come on.
culture, they're the pillars that build your identity as humans. And anything and everywhere that you're going to go, it's a promise you're going to deal with adversity. Adversity can only be
Mm.
transcended when you are rooted in who you are. And language and culture are
Yeah.
the ultimate vessels to do that, particularly as Black people. So I look to it in that way because I see it all the time. People that if you knew who you were, you wouldn't be worried about the problem. You would know that the problem has to worry about you, right? And so
Come
that's the
on.
kind
Come
of
on.
strength of character that we want to pass on to our children. But like you said, we want to send them to the best schools, we want them to have money. All of that is about status and possessions. And the way life works,
Mm.
one day you can lose everything and the next day you can regain everything. But if the sense of
Mm.
identity that your child has is connected to external material things, your child is going to have a very difficult life in an environment where
Mm.
you could have a very powerful existence, right? So that's why we do what we do. It can seem like very esoteric and rah-rah, as people love to say here in the West, but it's so much deeper than that. Because I guarantee you, at
Yes.
some point, your child would deal with struggle, and some people will use
Mm.
your child's blackness as a way to signify to them that you're smaller than who you are. But when you know who you are,
Mm.
when you know the true power of black power, nobody it can shake you. You can't touch this. You know you want to teach your
Mm.
child how to laugh at adversity. It starts with knowing who you are.
Yeah.
So like for me, that's what
Yeah.
all of this is. And one last thing that I could say is, the more I've learned specifically about where I come from and who I am through history, language, and culture, the harder it is for me to not become a little bit cocky. Because like
Mm.
whoosh, I look at the iris, like, oh, all of that is in my bloodline. Like this, I get chills. And even my parents, they tell me stuff like I had no idea this was going on. And then it changes your perception of the world because, like, oh, I'm good. I used to be worried about, oh, how I'm gonna do this. It's like, girl, you need to read more history. Because sometimes I
Come
had somebody
on.
say this, sometimes to be able to muster up what you need to face the next challenge, you need better memory. Because when you know who you are and you
Mm.
remember, do you remember who you are and where you come from?
Mm.
Sometimes that's all the
Mm.
reassurance and information you needed. You don't need more quote unquote
Come
money, quote unquote, status, and none of those things. You need identity.
Mm.
So I would
Yeah.
leave it at that. There's so
Powerful.
many other things that we can say. I'm gonna leave it for next time. Yeah.
Awesome. Powerful. Thank you so much. Yes. Thank you. And I mean, just to jump a little bit on that as well, I think it's also important that everyone knows that, the final word is just it's not about, because we're not in the defensive line.
Mm-hmm.
We're not, this is really about appreciating the true value that is
Yes.
already resident on the inside,
Yes.
because a lot of these resistances on the outside can be very
Mm-hmm.
distracting and make us
Yes.
feel like we're on the defense, right? So
Yeah.
everything we're learning is because so we can defend ourselves from the
Mm-hmm.
colonizer. No, that's not it, right? There's honey, there's honey in the honeycomb, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And if you don't, if conversations like this don't help you to search within, like she
Mm-hmm.
said, you don't eventually get to see, the beauty on the
Mhm.
inside. You just keep focusing on, making sure you're not a victim of
Mhm.
racial condition. And that's not what this is about. It's about the fact that,
Mhm.
dude, like she said, you are black, and that will not change anywhere you go to. All right. So the earlier you begin to know the richness of that identity,
Mm.
the
Mm.
better for your positioning as you continue in life. Of course, whether the resistances will come, like she has said,
Mhm.
but again,
Mhm.
good for you if it does. The environment where
Mhm.
everyone already has that measure of maturity to know that that's not a thing. But then at the
Mhm.
end of the day, there's richness in the black culture.
Yeah.
Like she said,
Yeah.
sometimes, in all honesty, you know, uh, I was about to preach.
Yes, please.
I was about to say, I just know so you just need to remember whose you are, and that's it.
Yes,
You
that's
just
it.
remember whose bother yourself about having a lot of details to defend yourself. Just
Mhm.
remember whose you are.
Mhm.
It's sufficient in itself to keep you confident. So
Mhm.
I hope that really helps some of our folks out there.
Yeah.
It's really been a very amazing conversation. One
Mm.
hour, 40 minutes. Wow. Amazing. Amazing. I know if I did shares with you guys, we're going to go 4 hours, and she will not have scratched the surface. So, all right, then. Thank you so much, everyone. So, this is
Thank
Àṣà
you.
Wa Busola here, your host, definitely every time. Chesley, thank you so much. We really,
Thank you.
truly value every unique perspective you brought
Thank
to
you.
the conversation today. I definitely believe that, anyone who comes in contact with the depth of the things that we've talked about today
Hmm.
would be transformed. All right,
Hmm.
because everything that happened yesterday wasn't just sharing our bias. This was really helping someone to open their eyes to what really needs to be seen. And I'm
Mhm.
glad that our conversation also touched base on a lot of solution points and all that.
Yes.
So thank you so much. It's not taken for granted. Thank you so much. So everyone, we're going to continue our session tomorrow, but not with Shes. I'm going to have to schedule her. She's a very busy person, so I would have to really find a way to get into her calendar to bring her on again one more time. So finally, in the comment section, please leave let's know, are you fluent, you're not fluent? Let's know some of the challenges
Mhm.
that you also face. If you could also bring up some conversations around that. Have you experienced kids, who have experienced culture shock? Everything we've talked about today, if you have any
Yeah.
experience, please share your unique perspective. It will really, really help as well, too. So thank you
Hmm.
so much, everyone. By the way, on the left side of your screen, right, if you scan that QR code, it will take you to Tayari.live. That's our website. She mentioned that tangentially. That was sweet marketing she did for us then. So check that out. Amazing gamified environment for learning Yoruba and Swahili. And like I always say as well, so once you use the app, you have like 20 minutes of free time every single day, and then some one or two things you can do to extend the duration you can have on the app too. So explore it, give us feedback. Let's know if there's something that is not there that would be great experience for you too as
Hmm.
well. So I think that'll be all for housekeeping. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. So that'll be all for today. We will see you in the next one.
Awesome.
Bye for now.
Bye.